When I first joined, I drove the devotees mad with questions just all during the day. Here it says this, but there it says that, and what about this, and what about that? I was loaded with questions. When Prabhupada came, some of my questions had already been addressed, but I did have questions for Srila Prabhupada. One question I remember I asked him was how it is that the spiritual master knows what the disciple is doing. The essence of my question was essentially, how do you get your brownie points? How do you get credit? If you do something and the spiritual master is not physically there, how does the spiritual master know what you're doing so that he'll be pleased and you'll get credit for it? That was the intention of my question. So Prabhupada answered it in a different sort of way. Srila Prabhupada said that everyone can tell. He said, when you're making progress, everyone can tell. Prabhupada said, face is the index of mind. So when you're making progress, spiritual progress, everyone can see. I remember on that walk that I went on, Prabhupada was mostly just chanting japa. It was sometimes we heard that Prabhupada would say so many things on his walks, but this walk, I think it was the first one I went on, Prabhupada just was chanting on his beads mostly. But I asked a question. I asked him, how is it that since Vyasadeva was present at the time that Bhagavad Gita was spoken, how could we say that Bhagavad Gita was lost? Because Krishna, Brahma, Narada, Vyas. So at the time of Bhagavad Gita, Vyas was still there. So then why does Krishna say to Arjuna that over course of time the knowledge was lost? So I asked Srila Prabhupada that question. And Srila Prabhupada answered that meant that it was not generally known. It was not generally known. Another time Srila Prabhupada came from Hawaii, and he began his lecture by mentioning that the Honolulu Advertiser, the local paper, had run an article and they'd said that the Swami is a little man, a small man, but he has got a big message. And Prabhupada was quite happy with that. And there was one man who came, a respectable student or perhaps a grad student, and he had a question about Advaita philosophy. And he brought up the example of the drop of water merging into the ocean of water. But he'd asked it in the context of Advaita philosophy, so he was something of a knowledgeable person, and he asked about this merging of the soul into the supreme, the way the drop merges into the ocean. And in a way that showed that he was behind the idea. This seemed right to him. And Prabhupada answered that the drop may merge with the ocean, but then the drop will be evaporated. That the drop merges with the ocean, but then the sun comes and the drop is evaporated and it's no longer in the ocean. So it's a temporary situation. But if you become a fish, if you become an aquatic, then you can dive in the ocean and remain there always. So Srila Prabhupada said that our philosophy is to merge deep into the ocean but maintain our individuality. So Prabhupada answered very brilliantly. Empty engagement, hardly anyone came, but this one intelligent person asked the question and Prabhupada just brilliantly answered him. One time in one evening program in New York, Rukmini asked a question. She asked, how is it if Lord Chaitanya is Krishna, how did he show the six opulences And Srila Prabhupada briefly answered. But then the next morning he called an Ishtagosti. Ishtagosti for Prabhupada meant a discussion of Krishna Katha. Later Ishtagosti came to mean like a gripe session or a management meeting. But Prabhupada's idea of Ishtagosti was some discussion about Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada called an Ishtagosti. He came and sat, which was unusual. I don't recall any other time when Prabhupada had a meeting in the morning. But he called an Ishtagosti. We all came, and Prabhupada led kirtan. And then he said about your question, Rukmini's question. And then he went into it in detail. He told how Lord Chaitanya was very beautiful. He said now the people were after fair skin, and Lord Chaitanya was very fair skinned. He was called Gaur Sundar. He was he was learned also. He was known as Nimai Pandit. Very beautiful, very learned. So he had, Prabhupada in that way described different opulences. But then he said his main opulence was his renunciation. And he told how he had his wife, Vishnupriya, and his elderly mother, but he left everything. Renunciation. So Prabhupada emphasized that opulence of Lord Chaitanya. One time Srila Prabhupada asked me, he said, "Why are you so skinny?" I don't know, Srila Prabhupada. Another time, Satsvarup Maharaj, because he was the temple president, gave me some little booklets. They were published by a well-known spiritual press in India, and they were dealing with Krishna. And the question was whether it was okay for us to read these books. And Srila Prabhupada, so he gave me the books and said, could you ask Srila Prabhupada whether it's all right to read these books, little booklets. So I went into Srila Prabhupada's room, and I brought the booklets, and I asked Srila Prabhupada, is it all right to read these books? Srila Prabhupada said, it is not required. But Prabhupada's meaning was, no. But I didn't understand that, because where I was coming from, there were elective subjects and there were required subjects. And the required subjects were the ones you had to take, and the elective subjects were optional. So I came back to Srila Prabhupada that, all right, they're not required, but is it all right? We went back and forth that way a couple of times before it dawned on me that not required means if it's not required, why do it? Forget it. So the answer was no. There was one engagement I remember I believe it was at Harvard, in fact. Prabhupada spoke in a classroom, and the professor, as I recall, was Indian. Perhaps he was even Bengali, but he was Indian. And he raised some question about Krishna and the gopis. And Prabhupada I don't recall the substance of what Prabhupada said, but I remember Prabhupada just becoming very stern with him, very strong. And the thrust of his response was, who are you? What is your qualification to understand these things? And you're just misunderstanding. Don't take it as mundane. That this is above your head. Krishna and the gopis. Just try to understand what is Krishna. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Try to understand from Bhagavad Gita. And you're going to talk about Krishna and the gopis. What right do you have? That was, not in so many words, but that was the thrust of it. And I just remember Prabhupada, his eyes flashing and Prabhupada becoming very animated. That this person is talking about Krishna and the gopis in some academic context. What does he know? What right does he have to be discussing these things? That was the gist of it.